Two strangers grabbed her service dog and held her wheelchair in place, but just as the boot came down, a voice thundered across the park, and the attackers instantly regretted everything. Before we go any deeper, please take a moment to subscribe, because stories like this deserve to be seen. Stories of courage, injustice, and the moments that change lives forever. And trust me, by the time you hear what really happened to Clara and her loyal dog Charlie, you'll understand why their voices must never be silenced. Hit that subscribe button now, so you won't miss the powerful stories I bring every single day. Now let's dive in. Clara Maxwell woke to the familiar ache in her lower back, the kind that never quite disappeared no matter how many pillows she arranged or stretches she attempted. She blinked at the pale morning light filtering through her apartment curtains and exhaled slowly, preparing herself for the routine that had become both a necessity and a ritual. 3 years ago, she had scaled mountain trails with the confidence of someone who believed her body would never fail her. She had guided nervous hikers up steep inclines, pointing out handholds and encouraging them through their fears. Then came the storm rescue, the slippery rocks, and the fall that changed everything. The spinal injury left her in a wheelchair, stripped of the career she loved and the independence she had taken for granted. But she had Charlie. The German shepherd lifted his head from his mat beside her bed, dark eyes alert and focused. He stood immediately, stretching before padding over to her side. Clara smiled, reaching down to stroke his sleek coat. "Good morning, buddy," she murmured. Charlie pressed his nose against her palm, his tail wagging gently. He was more than a pet. He was her stability when she transferred from bed to wheelchair, her retriever when items slipped from her grasp, and her anchor when the weight of her new reality threatened to drown her. Clara maneuvered herself into her chair with practiced efficiency, though it still required effort and concentration. Charlie watched patiently, positioning himself exactly where she needed him. Together, they moved through her morning routine, breakfast, medication, the series of exercises her physical therapist insisted she maintain. By early afternoon, restlessness had settled into her chest. The apartment walls felt too close, the air too still. She needed space, movement, the illusion of freedom that only the outdoors could provide. "Want to go to the park?" she asked Charlie. His ears perked forward, and he trotted toward the door, his service vest already in his mouth. Clara laughed, the sound light and genuine. "I'll take that as a yes." Brookline Meadows Park had become her sanctuary, one of the few public spaces where she felt something close to normal. The paved paths accommodated her wheelchair, and the open meadows reminded her of the mountains she once explored. She could breathe there. The November air bit at her cheeks as she rolled down the familiar trail, Charlie walking steadily beside her. Gray clouds hung heavy overhead, but no rain threatened. The park was quiet, save for the distant laughter of children and the rustle of wind through bare branches. Clara closed her eyes for a moment, letting the cold breeze wash over her face. This was peace. Charlie suddenly stopped, his body tensing. Clara opened her eyes and followed his gaze across the meadow. Two men stood near the tree line, talking and occasionally glancing in her direction. One wore a gray hoodie, the other a black jacket. They looked young, perhaps mid-20s, their postures relaxed. Clara felt a flicker of unease but dismissed it quickly. People came to the park all the time. There was nothing threatening about two men having a conversation. She rolled forward, focusing on the path ahead, on the rhythm of her wheels against pavement, on Charlie's steady presence. The men were probably just enjoying the afternoon, same as her. Nothing to worry about. Not yet. Clara tossed the tennis ball across the grass, watching as Charlie bounded after it with enthusiasm that always made her smile. He retrieved it quickly, trotting back with the ball held gently between his teeth. She took it from him, praising him softly, and threw it again. For a few precious minutes, everything felt normal. Then she heard footsteps behind her. "Hey there," a voice called out, dripping with false friendliness. Clara turned to see the two men from earlier approaching. The one in the grey hoodie walked with a swagger that immediately set her on edge. His companion in the black jacket wore a smirk that didn't reach his eyes. "Afternoon," Clara replied cautiously, her hand instinctively moving to Charlie's collar as he returned to her side. "Nice dog," the grey-hooded man said, stopping a few feet away. "What's his deal? Is he, like, a real service dog or one of those emotional support things people buy online?" Clara's jaw tightened. "He's a trained service dog. Now if you'll excuse me." "Whoa, whoa, calm down," the other man interrupted, holding up his hands in mock surrender. "Dave here was just asking a question. No need to get defensive." "Dave." She filed the name away, though she hoped she'd never need it. "I'm not being defensive," Clara said evenly. "I'm just trying to enjoy my afternoon." "In a wheelchair," Dave said, tilting his head as if genuinely curious. "What happened? Bad car accident? Or were you just born unlucky?" Heat flooded Clara's cheeks. "That's none of your business." "See, Ryan, I told you," Dave continued, ignoring her completely. "These disability faker people are everywhere now. Get a fake vest for their dog, roll around in a chair for sympathy, probably collecting checks they don't deserve." Clara's hands gripped her wheels. "I'm leaving." She began to turn, but Dave stepped directly into her path. Ryan moved to her other side, effectively boxing her in. "We're just talking," Ryan said with a grin. "What's the rush?" Charlie growled low in his throat, positioning himself between Clara and the men. His ears flattened against his head, his body rigid with protective tension. "Oh, look at that," Dave mocked. "That service doggy is getting aggressive. That's not very well trained, is it?" Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She glanced around the park desperately. A jogger passed on a distant trail, earbuds in, oblivious. A woman with a stroller sat on a bench 50 yards away, her attention on her phone. An elderly couple walked slowly near the pond, too far to hear anything. No one was paying attention. "Charlie, heel," Clara commanded, her voice shaking despite her effort to sound calm. "Yeah, Charlie, heel," Dave mimicked in a high-pitched voice. Then his expression hardened. "Or maybe you should learn some manners." He reached down suddenly and grabbed Charlie's leash, yanking it hard. Charlie yelped, pulled off balance. Clara lunged forward in her chair, grabbing for the leash, but Ryan stepped behind her, his hands gripping the handles of her wheelchair. "Let go of him!" Clara shouted, panic flooding her voice. Dave jerked the leash again, dragging Charlie sideways. The dog struggled, his growls turning desperate. Clara's vision blurred with tears of rage and terror. She tried to move her chair, but Ryan held it firmly in place. "Help!" she screamed toward the distant parkgoers. "Someone help!" Dave looked down at Charlie with cold amusement. And then he raised his foot. Dave's boot connected with Charlie's ribs with a sickening thud. If this story has your heart racing right now, just wait. What's coming next will shake you to your core. And if you love stories that expose cruelty, celebrate bravery, and remind us that justice still exists, then make sure you're subscribed. I upload gripping, emotional stories like this every day, and I don't want you to miss a single one. The German Shepherd yelped, a sound so sharp and agonized that it tore through Clara's chest like a blade. Charlie's legs buckled, and he collapsed onto his side, panting heavily, his dark eyes wide with pain and confusion. "No! Stop!" Clara screamed, her voice breaking into a sob. "Please, stop!" Dave laughed, a cruel, grating sound that made her stomach turn. He pulled the leash tighter, dragging Charlie across the grass as the dog whimpered and struggled weakly. "What's wrong?" Dave taunted, looking back at Clara with mock concern. "I thought he was trained." Doesn't look so tough now, does he? Ryan still gripped the handles of her wheelchair, keeping her trapped, helpless. Clara clawed at his hands, trying to pull them away, but he only tightened his hold. "Let me go," she shrieked, tears streaming down her face. "He's not hurting you. Just leave us alone." Dave raised his boot again, positioning himself over Charlie's trembling body. Clara's world collapsed into that single, horrifying moment. She couldn't move. Couldn't reach him. Couldn't protect the one living being who had never abandoned her. "Help!" she screamed again, her voice raw and desperate. "Somebody help us!" And then, thunder. Not from the sky, but from across the park. Heavy, pounding footsteps racing toward them at terrifying speed. "Police? Step away from her, now!" The voice was a roar of command, sharp and unyielding. Officer Morgan Strickland burst through the tree line like a force of nature, his uniform unmistakable, his face a mask of pure fury. He was still 30 yards away but closing the distance with explosive speed. Dave hesitated, his foot hovering over Charlie. "I said step away!" Morgan bellowed. Dave's face twisted with defiance. He brought his boot down again. He never completed the motion. Morgan hit him like a freight train, tackling him sideways with such force that both men crashed into the dirt. Dave's breath left him in a shocked gasp as Morgan flipped him onto his stomach, wrenching his arms behind his back. "Don't move," Morgan snarled, his knee pressed firmly into Dave's spine. Ryan released Clara's wheelchair and bolted. He made it 3 steps before Morgan was on his feet, leaving Dave cuffed on the ground. Morgan closed the distance in seconds, grabbing Ryan by the collar and slamming him face-first into the grass. "Stay down," Morgan ordered, his voice ice-cold. Around them, the park suddenly erupted with movement. The woman with the stroller rushed forward, phone raised and recording. The jogger stopped mid-stride, pulling out his earbuds and staring in shock. The elderly couple hurried closer, the man already dialing 911. Morgan secured Ryan with swift efficiency, then turned immediately toward Clara. His entire demeanor shifted. He said gently, kneeling beside her chair. "Are you hurt?" Clara couldn't speak. She shook her head frantically, pointing at Charlie, who lay panting on his side, his ribs rising and falling too rapidly. Morgan's jaw tightened. He moved to Charlie carefully, his large hands surprisingly gentle as he examined the dog. Charlie whimpered but didn't snap, his tail thumping weakly against the ground. "He's breathing," Morgan said quietly. "Ribs might be bruised, but he's responsive. We're going to get him help right now." He pulled his radio from his belt. "Dispatch, this is Officer Strickland. I need animal control and a veterinary emergency unit at Brookline Meadows Park immediately. Service dog injured during an assault. 2 suspects in custody." Clara's sobs finally broke free, deep, shaking, uncontrollable. Morgan reached out and placed a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said firmly. "I've got you." The veterinary clinic smelled of antiseptic and anxiety. Clara sat beside the examination table, her hand resting on Charlie's head as the vet carefully palpated his ribs. Charlie flinched but remained still, his trust in her absolute even through his pain. "Severe bruising along the rib cage," Dr. Patel said softly, her expression sympathetic. "No fractures, thankfully, but he's going to be sore for several weeks. I'm prescribing pain medication and anti-inflammatories. He'll need rest and monitoring." Clara nodded, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. Charlie licked her fingers weakly, and she had to bite her lip to keep from crying again. Officer Morgan stood near the doorway, his presence steady and reassuring. He had refused to leave, insisting on driving her here personally and waiting throughout the examination. "He's a fighter," Dr. Patel added, stroking Charlie's ears. He's going to be okay. 2 hours later, Morgan helped Clara carry Charlie's medication into her apartment. The German Shepherd limped slowly inside, settling onto his bed with a pained sigh. Clara covered him with his favorite blanket, her hands trembling. "You did the right thing filing that report," Morgan said, leaning against her kitchen counter. "I made sure every detail was documented. Their names are Dave Mercer and Ryan Holt." Clara looked up sharply. "Do you know them?" Morgan's jaw tightened. "Know of them. Their families practically own half of Brookline. Big donors to the department, the mayor's office, local charities. They throw money around like it's nothing." A chill crept down Clara's spine. "What does that mean for the case?" "It means they'll fight it," Morgan admitted. "But you have witnesses, video footage from bystanders, and my testimony. The evidence is solid." Clara wanted to believe him. She desperately wanted to believe that justice would prevail. That belief lasted exactly 6 hours. Her phone rang just before 8 that evening. The number was unfamiliar, but she answered anyway. "Ms. Maxwell?" The voice was smooth, professional, and utterly devoid of warmth. "My name is Gerald Hastings. I represent the Mercer and Holt families." Clara's stomach dropped. "I'm calling regarding the incident at Brookline Meadows Park," Hastings continued. "My clients are deeply concerned about the allegations being made against their sons. After reviewing the circumstances, it's clear that your dog displayed aggressive behavior, and the young men were simply defending themselves." "That's a lie," Clara said, her voice shaking with anger. "Charlie never." "Ms. Maxwell," Hastings interrupted coldly, "I strongly advise you to reconsider pursuing this matter. If you withdraw your complaint immediately, we can resolve this quietly. However, if you insist on pressing charges, my clients are prepared to file a counterclaim." "A counterclaim?" Clara repeated, disbelief flooding her voice. "Your dog attacked 2 innocent civilians. We'll be seeking criminal charges for harboring a dangerous animal, along with civil penalties. Additionally, given your housing situation," he paused meaningfully, "we'll be filing complaints with your building management regarding code violations related to aggressive animals in disability housing." Clara's blood ran cold. "You're threatening to have me evicted." "I'm informing you of the consequences of your actions," Hastings said smoothly. "You have 24 hours to withdraw your statement. Consider this conversation a courtesy." The line went dead. Clara sat frozen, the phone still pressed against her ear. Her hand shook so violently she nearly dropped it. Charlie lifted his head from his bed, whining softly. She called Morgan immediately. "They're not going to get away with this," he said, his voice tight with barely controlled fury. "I don't care how much money they have." But even as he spoke, Clara could hear the doubt beneath his certainty. The system had power. And so did they. Clara didn't sleep that night. Every creak of the building, every distant footstep in the hallway made her heart race. Charlie lay beside her bed, his breathing still labored, his body too still. She reached down periodically to touch his fur, needing the reassurance that he was still there, still breathing. The next morning, she tried to convince herself that things would be okay. She had Morgan's support. She had witnesses. She had the truth. But truth, she was learning, didn't always matter. The first sign came when she wheeled herself to the corner store 2 blocks from her apartment. A black sedan sat idling across the street, windows tinted dark. When she emerged 20 minutes later, it was still there. She told herself it was paranoia. Until it followed her home. By the 3rd day, Clara noticed the stares. People in her building who used to smile politely now averted their eyes. Her neighbor, Mrs. Chen, who always stopped to chat, hurried past without a word. Then came the social media posts. Someone had created a fake account using her name and photo, claiming she had trained her dog to attack people and was now playing victim for sympathy. The comments beneath were vicious, calling her a fraud, a liar, a scammer. Her hands shook as she reported the account, knowing it would take days to remove, if it was removed at all. On the fourth morning, Clara woke to find her wheelchair tire completely flat. Not naturally deflated, slashed. A clean, deliberate cut ran along the rubber. She stared at it, her throat tight, her mind racing. She had locked her apartment. She had been careful. How had someone gotten to it overnight? Morgan arrived within 20 minutes of her call, his face grim as he examined the damage. "This isn't random," he said quietly. "They're trying to isolate you. Make you afraid to leave your apartment." "It's working," Clara whispered. 2 days later, Charlie's service vest disappeared. Clara had hung it on the hook by her door as always. When she reached for it that morning, it was gone. She searched every corner of her apartment, panic rising with each empty drawer and closet. Charlie needed that vest. Without it, people questioned his legitimacy. Without it, businesses could refuse them entry. Without it, she was even more vulnerable. That afternoon, she found the note. It had been slipped under her door, folded once, the words written in block letters with black marker. "If you think today was bad, wait until next time." Clara's hands trembled so violently she dropped the paper. It fluttered to the floor, and she stared at it as if it might catch fire. She called Morgan again. He didn't just come. He stayed. Morgan spent 2 hours installing motion sensor alarms on her windows and door, checking every lock, examining every entry point. He was methodical, thorough, his jaw set with determination. "You're not going through this alone," he said firmly, kneeling beside her wheelchair. "I know the system feels like it's failing you right now. But I'm not going anywhere." Clara's eyes burned with unshed tears. "Why are you doing this? You don't even know me." Morgan met her gaze steadily. "Because it's the right thing to do. And because I took an oath to protect people, not just the ones with money and lawyers." For the first time in days, Clara felt a flicker of hope. But in the back of her mind, the note's words echoed like a promise. Wait until next time. Clara couldn't close her eyes without seeing it. Dave's boot rising. Charlie collapsing. The laughter that followed. Every time she tried to sleep, the images replayed with vivid, merciless clarity until she jolted awake, gasping and drenched in sweat. She attempted to return to Brookline Meadows Park 5 days after the attack. She made it halfway down the main path before her chest tightened so severely she couldn't breathe. Her hands locked on her wheels. Her vision tunneled. Charlie pressed against her leg, whining, sensing her distress. She turned around and never made it back. Charlie wasn't the same either. The once confident German shepherd now flinched when strangers approached too quickly. His ears flattened at loud voices. At night, he paced restlessly, unable to settle, his trauma mirroring her own. Desperation drove Clara to the police station on the 8th day. She wheeled herself to the front desk and requested to speak with someone about escalating her case. The desk sergeant's expression was polite but guarded. "Your report is already filed. The investigation is ongoing." "It's not ongoing," Clara said, her voice stronger than she felt. "Nothing's happening. Meanwhile, I'm being harassed, threatened." "I understand your frustration," the sergeant interrupted gently. "But these things take time." Morgan appeared from a side hallway, his face darkening when he saw her. "Clara? What's going on?" Before she could answer, a senior officer, Lieutenant Dawson, emerged from an office behind the desk. His expression was carefully neutral as he approached Morgan. "Officer Strickland, a word." Clara watched as Morgan was pulled aside. She couldn't hear the conversation, but she saw Morgan's posture stiffen, saw his jaw clench, saw him shake his head firmly. Dawson's voice rose slightly, audible now, "Don't need complications with donors." Morgan's response was loud enough to carry across the lobby. "With all due respect, sir, she was assaulted. Her service dog was kicked. That's not a complication. That's a crime." Dawson's face reddened. "What's your tone, Strickland?" The conversation ended abruptly. Morgan returned to Clara, frustration etched across his features. "I'm sorry," he said quietly. "They're stalling. But I'm not letting this go." Clara nodded numbly, but hopelessness settled over her like a suffocating blanket. Power protected the guilty. Money silenced justice. Fear controlled everything. That night, Clara lay awake in the darkness of her apartment, Charlie curled protectively at the foot of her bed. The building was never truly silent, pipes groaned, neighbors moved about, distant traffic hummed, but she had learned its rhythms. These sounds were different. Footsteps in the hallway. Slow. Deliberate. Stopping outside her door. Whispers. Low and indistinct but unmistakably human. Charlie's head lifted, his ears pricked forward. A low growl rumbled in his chest. Clara's heart hammered against her ribs. She reached for her phone with shaking hands, her thumb finding Morgan's contact. He answered on the second ring. "Clara." "Something's wrong," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I hear them outside my door. I know they're coming." Morgan's response was immediate. "Lock yourself in your bedroom. Do not open the door for anyone but me. I'm on my way." The line stayed connected, his breathing steady in her ear as the footsteps in the hallway grew closer. Clara pressed herself against her bedroom wall, one hand gripping Charlie's collar, the other clutching her phone. Morgan's steady breathing came through the speaker, an anchor in the darkness. "I'm 2 minutes out," he said quietly. "Stay exactly where you are." Outside her apartment, the footsteps stopped. Clara heard the faint scrape of something metal, a tool against her lock. Her blood turned to ice. They were trying to get in. What Clara didn't know was that Morgan had been watching her building for the past 3 nights. He had parked his personal vehicle down the block, waiting, knowing with grim certainty that Dave and Ryan wouldn't stop. Men like them never did. Tonight, he had been right. He had watched them slip through the propped-open back door 20 minutes ago, their faces obscured by hooded sweatshirts, their movements purposeful and predatory. He had followed them inside, moving through the dimly lit corridors like a shadow, his bodycam already recording. Now he stood motionless in the alcove across from Clara's door, watching as Dave worked a crowbar into the doorframe while Ryan kept lookout. Morgan stepped into the light. "You picked the wrong night," he said, his voice cold and absolute. Both men spun around, shock flashing across their faces. Dave still held the crowbar. "Drop it," Morgan commanded. "Hands where I can see them. Now." Ryan bolted. Morgan was faster. He closed the distance in 3 strides, catching Ryan's shoulder and slamming him face-first against the wall. The impact echoed through the corridor as Morgan secured his wrist, twisting it up behind his back. Dave swung the crowbar wildly. Morgan ducked, the metal whistling past his head, and drove his shoulder into Dave's midsection. The crowbar clattered to the floor as both men crashed against the opposite wall. Morgan wrenched Dave's arm into a lock, forcing him down onto his knees with controlled, devastating precision. "You're done," Morgan growled, securing handcuffs on both men with swift efficiency. "Both of you." His bodycam light blinked steadily, capturing every second, every face, every incriminating moment. Inside her apartment, Clara heard the struggle end. Silence fell. Then, a knock. "Clara, it's Morgan. Open the door. It's over." Her hand shook so badly she could barely turn the lock. When the door swung open, she saw Morgan standing in the hallway, Dave and Ryan cuffed and kneeling on the floor behind him. "You're safe now," Morgan said gently. "This time, they can't run." Chapter 8: Undeniable Justice. The bodycam footage changed everything. Within 24 hours of Morgan submitting the recording, the department had no choice but to act. The video was irrefutable: Dave and Ryan breaking into Clara's building, wielding a crowbar, attempting forced entry. Morgan's calm commands. Their violent resistance. Everything captured in perfect, damning clarity. Lieutenant Dawson called Morgan into his office the next morning. Whatever pressure the Mercer and Holt families had applied before evaporated in the face of evidence that could destroy the department's reputation if ignored. "Full charges," Dawson said tersely, sliding the paperwork across his desk. "Aggravated animal cruelty, assault on a vulnerable adult, harassment, breaking and entering, criminal intimidation." Morgan nodded once, his expression unreadable. "Good." The families hired the best defense attorneys money could buy, but even they couldn't spin away video evidence. Gerald Hastings, the lawyer who had threatened Clara, stopped returning calls. 2 weeks later, Clara sat in the courthouse gallery, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Charlie rested beside her wheelchair, his vest newly replaced, his ribs finally healed. Morgan stood at the back of the room in full uniform, his presence steady and reassuring. When the judge read the charges aloud, Clara felt something shift inside her chest. Not quite relief, not yet, but the beginning of it. Dave and Ryan sat at the defense table, their confident smirks long gone, replaced by pale-faced anxiety. Their fathers sat behind them, their expressions grim. The footage had leaked online. Someone in the department, Clara suspected Morgan but would never ask, had ensured the public saw what really happened. The comments flooded in: support for Clara, outrage at the attackers, demands for accountability. For the first time since the attack, Clara wasn't alone in her fight. The judge set bail conditions, electronic monitoring, restraining orders, prohibition from leaving the county. Sentencing would come later, but the outcome was no longer in doubt. Outside the courthouse, Morgan walked Clara to her accessible van. "Thank you," she said quietly, the words inadequate for everything he had done. Morgan shook his head. "You didn't give up. That's what made the difference." Clara looked down at Charlie, who gazed up at her with those loyal, trusting eyes. She had come so close to losing him. To losing everything. But she hadn't. Justice, delayed and hard-fought, had finally arrived. Spring came to Brookline with gentle warmth and the return of green to the meadows. Clara rolled slowly down the familiar path, Charlie trotting beside her with renewed confidence. His limp had vanished weeks ago, and the wariness in his eyes had gradually faded, replaced by something closer to his old spirit. Morgan walked on her other side, out of uniform for once, dressed in jeans and a simple jacket. He had insisted on accompanying her for this first return to the park, and Clara hadn't argued. "It feels different now," she said quietly, gazing across the open grass where everything had happened. "Because you're different," Morgan replied. "Stronger." Clara considered that. She had started a small advocacy group 3 weeks ago, just a handful of people at first, meeting in the community center. Disabled individuals who had faced harassment, discrimination, or violence. People who needed to know they weren't alone, that their stories mattered. The group had grown quickly. 20 members now. Then 30. Stories poured in from across the county. Clara had found purpose in her pain. She stopped her wheelchair near the spot where she used to throw the ball for Charlie. The memories were still there, sharp-edged and vivid, but they no longer controlled her. "I never thanked you properly," Clara said, turning to Morgan. For believing me when it felt like no one else would. Morgan shook his head. You fought for yourself. I just made sure you weren't fighting alone. Charlie barked softly, pawing at Clara's leg. She laughed and produced a tennis ball from her bag. Ready, buddy. She threw it across the grass. Charlie bounded after it with pure joy, his tail streaming behind him like a flag. The sun began its descent toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of gold and rose. Clara, Morgan, and Charlie sat together in comfortable silence, watching the light change, feeling the warmth on their faces. Clara thought about everything she had endured, the attack, the intimidation, the fear that had nearly consumed her. But danger hadn't broken her. It had revealed who would stand beside her when everything fell apart. And in that revelation, she had found not just survival, but strength she never knew she possessed. I'm ready to go home, Clara said softly. Morgan smiled. Then let's go home. Thank you so much for watching this story to the end. Clara's courage, Charlie's loyalty, and Officer Morgan's strength remind us that even in the darkest moments, heroes rise. If this story touched your heart, even for a second, please subscribe. Your support helps me bring you more powerful stories every single day, stories of hope, justice, survival, and humanity. I can't wait to share the next one with you.